My name is Clara Monroe, and I live alone in a small blue house on Maple Street in Cleveland, Ohio, America. The porch sags a little, but the railing is strong, and every nail in it is one I set with my own hands. I keep a jar by the sink for loose bills and coins, and when it reaches $100, I let myself buy something that lasts: good shoes, a heavy mop, a winter coat. Most days I clean offices and apartments from dawn until the streetlights come on. The work is not fancy, but it is honest, and when the floors shine, my chest feels light. In the evenings, I sit by the window with a guidebook to London I found at a thrift store for £3, and I trace the river with my finger. I like how the map lines behave. I like how they promise that if you follow one street, you will end up where it says you will. 3 weeks ago, my father called from Boston. His voice sounded careful, like he was holding a glass of water he did not want to spill. "Don't come to my wedding," he said. I pressed the phone tight to my ear and said, "Why?" He sighed, a long, tired sound, and said, "I don't want people to know you're just a cleaner." Before I could answer, his fiancée, Vivian Hart, took the phone. Her words were smooth and cold. "We'll say you're dead. Never contact us again." The call ended. I stared at my pale reflection in the black screen and felt something close behind my ribs. My house was so quiet I could hear the clock tick and the pipes hum. I walked to the porch, sat on the top step, and told myself to breathe. When the tears slowed, I did the one thing that always steadies me. I went to work. I scrubbed a kitchen on Euclid Avenue for a woman named Grace Bennett, who pays me $25 an hour and makes strong coffee I never refuse. After that, I wiped down the glass walls of a small law office and left an invoice for $80 on the front desk. On good weeks, if I add a weekend job in New York, I can bring home $700 and still save a little. Once, a kind judge named Eleanor Pike slipped me a $50 tip and said, "Your work is worth more." I tucked the bill in my pocket and walked out feeling taller. When the day is long and my back aches, I picture a quiet trip to New England in autumn, or a winter week in Chicago with my mother, Laura, who works the night desk at a riverfront hotel and worries aloud but never judges. "You are steady," she tells me on the phone. Steady can cross any bridge in America or Europe. I grew up in a split-level house in Columbus that my father never finished fixing. He cut a hole for a second front door and then left it that way, a doorway to nothing, with studs showing like ribs. When I was little, I thought it meant our family had two ways to come home. After the divorce, my mother moved to Chicago, and my father stayed with his plans and his debts, and then with Vivian, who smiled for photos and frowned at people like me. The last time I saw them together, she looked me up and down and asked if I had thought about real work. I told her real work is what pays the rent on time. She gave a small laugh that did not reach her eyes and said nothing more. The week of the wedding, I tried to keep my head low and my hands busy. I raised my rate by $2 for deep cleans and printed simple cards that read, "Clara Monroe Cleaning. Honest work, fair price." A man in a hardware store offered me $10 off a new bucket when he saw the stack in my palm. I thanked him and walked home in the late light, my new bucket swinging, my house waiting like a friend. On Saturday, the wedding day, I woke before sunrise and brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. I set my phone on the counter, face down, and packed my caddy. At 10, the phone began to buzz. At noon, it wouldn't stop. Calls from my father. Calls from my mother. Messages from my uncle in Philadelphia, my aunt in Detroit, even a client in New York. My stomach tightened. I wiped my hands, flipped the phone, and stared at the screen as it lit and rattled. What happened? The phone would not stop. I let it ring until my chest hurt. Then I answered my mother. Laura spoke fast, breath catching like she had run up a hill in Chicago wind. "Clara, are you safe?" she asked. I said yes. She lowered her voice. "Your father fainted at the church in Boston. The police are there. Vivian is gone." The words felt unreal, like a dream that still had morning on it. I pressed my hand to the counter in my small blue house in Cleveland and looked at the jar by the sink. There was $46 inside, folded tight like small plans. I told my mother I would call back. When I hung up, the phone rang again. This time it was a number I did not know. A steady voice said, Miss Monroe, this is Officer Karen Doyle with Boston Police. We need to ask you a few questions about Vivian Hart. I told her my name and my address and that I clean homes and offices, and yes, I knew Vivian because she was going to marry my father, Daniel Monroe. Officer Doyle asked if I had ever given Vivian money. I let out a small laugh that sounded strange in my own ears. No, I said. I don't have money to lend. The officer paused, then said they had found a note with my number in a planner. There might be a list of people who had paid Vivian for reasons that did not add up. If you have any papers or messages, keep them, she said. They may help. I opened the glove box of my old van and slid out the bridal invoice I had found under the floor mat earlier that week. The paper listed address, a veil, and special alterations, total $9,800, billed to Daniel Monroe. The signature on the paid line looked too smooth, like someone had drawn it using a ruler. I told Officer Doyle what I had. She asked me to bring it if I came to Boston or to scan it if I stayed in Ohio. When the call ended, I stood in the doorway and looked down Maple Street. A mail truck rattled by. A girl jumped rope, counting out loud. The world kept moving, as if it did not know about broken plans. My father finally called. His voice was smaller than I remembered, like a radio turned down. Clara, he said, and my name shook in his mouth. I am sorry. I should never have said you were just anything. I did not answer right away. I could hear people talking near him, a church echo, shoes on tile. He told me a man named Mark Rivers had walked into the church at noon and said Vivian owed him £6,000. A woman named Nora James had bank slips for $14,500. Then someone else came forward. By the time the police arrived, Vivian had slipped out a side door and left her bouquet on a chair, like a promise set down and forgotten. My father said he had not seen it coming. I pressed my forehead to the cool window glass and watched a cloud pull a shadow over the yard. I believe you didn't, I said. After the calls, I cleaned to steady my hands. I scrubbed the sink until it showed my face like a dim coin. Work, I told myself, is a rope that hangs from the ceiling when the floor gives way. I wipe the table where I count my tips and sort my cards. On the fridge, I keep a photo of our old split-level house in Columbus, the one with 2 front doors. My father once said the second door would bring luck. We never used it. It opened on bare wood and dust, a doorway to air. As a girl, I used to stand there with my lunch and pretend I could step through to a better room. Now, looking at the photo, I thought about how long I had been waiting to be let in, when I had already built a door of my own. Near evening, Judge Eleanor Pike called from New York. She had heard a bit of the scene from a friend who lived near the church and came by to watch the commotion. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. People forget that love is not a show. It is laundry and light bulbs and being kind at the end of a long day. She told me if my father needed a lawyer, she knew someone who would start pro bono, and if not, she would cover $500 to begin. I thanked her and felt the tight band around my ribs ease a little. It is a good thing when someone says, I see your work, and means all of it. When dark came, the street settled. I counted the money in the jar again and wrote the total on an index card. I texted my mother that I was home and safe. I texted my father that I had the invoice and would help however I could. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the blue quiet of my house. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked and then yawned itself silent. I laid my hand on the doorframe and thought of the house in Columbus with a second door, and of this house in Cleveland with one door that sticks in the heat and still opens if you lean your shoulder and try. I told myself, out loud and clear, that I would not stay outside my own life. Tomorrow I would work, and I would keep my name, and I would turn the page. Saturday was supposed to be about roses and rings in Boston, but in my small blue house in Cleveland, the day felt like thunder pressing on the roof. I made coffee dark as a secret and set my phone face down, yet it vibrated across the counter like a trapped insect. When I finally looked, the screen was stacked with missed calls and messages. My father, my mother in Chicago, my aunt in Detroit, my uncle in Philadelphia, even Judge Eleanor Pike in New York. I told myself to stand still, to breathe, to mop the kitchen, anything steady. But still the questions buzzed. Where are you? Are you safe?
Call now.
The hallway felt longer than it was. The distance between the sink and the front door stretched like old gum. I told myself to work, because work is the rope I hold when the world shakes. I pulled out the vacuum and ran it over the living room rug until the stripes looked like neat fields in a map. I wiped the window ledges and watched the mail truck rattle by. I even dusted the framed picture of our old split level in Columbus, the house with 2 front doors that never quite made sense. It calmed me to see it, a reminder that life can be unfinished and still shelter you. When the doorbell rang, I jumped. Through the glass, I saw a woman and a man on the porch, their posture polite and official. I opened the door to Officer Karen Doyle and her partner, Officer Miguel Turner, both from Boston Police. They had flown to Cleveland after the ceremony fell apart, they said, and they were following up on leads that crossed state lines. I invited them in and set the invoice on the table. The one for the dress and the veil and the special alterations, $9,800, billed to my father. Officer Doyle read every line and asked to photograph it. Officer Turner took out a small recorder and asked if I would tell the story as I knew it, from the first phone call to the last message. My voice surprised me, steady, not small. I told them about Vivian's sharp smile, about my father's warning to stay away, about the text that said, "We'll say you're dead." I told them about the unknown numbers, the list in a planner that had my name on it for no good reason. Officer Doyle nodded, taking notes in careful block letters. When I finished, she said quietly, "Miss Monroe, you've helped more than you know." They left me her card, embossed and weighty, the kind of card people pass across tables when the stakes are real. After they left, my father called. His voice came through soft and frayed. He told me how the church in Boston had filled with whispers, how a man named Mark Rivers stood at the back with a folder and said he had given Vivian £6,000 last year for an investment she promised would double in a month. Then a woman named Nora James produced slips for $14,500, paid in cash to help with a bridge loan. A third person stepped forward, then a fourth. The organist stopped mid-hymn. My father's legs went out from under him. When the ushers opened the side door to get air, Vivian was gone, bouquet abandoned on a chair like a receipt for a life she never meant to buy. "I should have known," he said, his words breaking. I wanted to say he should have chosen me, not luck. Instead, I told him, "We'll help the police. Then we'll help ourselves." It was the first time in years I said we and meant it. Toward afternoon, Eleanor called from New York. "I spoke to a colleague in Boston," she said. "He'll consult at no charge, and if needed, I'll put up $500 to get a proper case file started." Her certainty was a hand on my shoulder. After we hung up, I made a simple lunch. Eggs, toast, the last of the blackberry jam, and counted the money in the jar by the sink. $46, plus a folded $20 from yesterday's tip, plus 2 singles I'd forgotten under the lid. I wrote $68 on an index card and felt order return in small squares. Order is not everything, but it is a floor you can stand on. Near dusk, the house filled with the gold light I love, the kind that makes even scuffed baseboards look like they belong to a better room. I took a slow inventory of my life. A sturdy mop worth $18, a bucket I bought with a $10 discount from the hardware clerk, a stack of business cards, Clara Monroe cleaning. Honest work, fair price, banded with a rubber ring. I thought of Europe and its tiny sidewalks I had never walked, of America and its wide roads I drove each week for work. I thought of Columbus's false second door, and this honest single one that sticks on humid days and still opens if you lean your shoulder, count to 3, and push. When the phone buzzed again, I finally answered my mother. "I'm here," I said. "I'm steady." We spoke about lawyers and receipts and the way grief can wear a wedding's clothes. Before we hung up, she said, "You are not what they called you. Your work is a kind of truth." After the call, I set the police card beside the invoice and locked both in the drawer where I keep rent receipts and the spare key for Mrs. Bennett's condo. Then I washed the dinner plate, lifted the sash, and let the cool night in. Somewhere in Boston, a search had begun. In Cleveland, I turned off the kitchen light and listened to my house breathe around me. One room, one door, one woman awake and ready. Sunday morning came soft and pale, and the quiet in my Cleveland house felt like a bandage pressed to a bruise. I boiled water for tea and opened the drawer with the invoice and the police card, then closed it again, the way you touch a wound to make sure it's still there. The jar by the sink held $68, plus a quarter I hadn't counted. Small coins, small plans. I wiped the table and straightened my stack of business cards. Clara Monroe Cleaning. Honest work, fair price, and thought about how a life is built one sweep, one scrub, one promise kept. The phone lay face down. I let it rest. The house breathed around me, honest and single-doored, blue paint scuffed at the corners like a well-used book. At noon there was a knock. I peered through the glass and saw my mother on the steps, cheeks pink from the long drive from Chicago, and behind her, to my shock, Judge Eleanor Pike from New York, carrying a foil-covered pie. Last, slow at the curb, stood my father, hands shoved in his pockets like a boy late to class. I opened the door wide. "Come in," I said, and the word felt like a key finally turning. In my small kitchen we set the pie, apple, Eleanor said on the counter. My mother reached for my face with the same careful hands she used to fix my collars before school. "You look steady," she said. "I am," I said and believed it. My father spoke first, rough-voiced. "Clara, I was wrong. I let pride dress up as love and call you less than you are. I was cruel." He stared at his shoes, then at the jar on my counter, as if the saved bills were a language he was only now learning to read. "If you'll let me, I want to make things right." I poured tea and slid him a mug. "Start by telling the truth," I said. He nodded. Eleanor set a folder on the table, names, phone numbers, a letter of engagement from a Boston attorney willing to start pro bono. "If it turns into billable hours, I'll cover the first $500, she added, like she was passing me a bridge over a cold river. My mother pulled $60 from her wallet and tucked it under the sugar bowl. "Gas money back to Chicago," I said. She shook her head. "For your jar," she said. "For your future." We called Officer Karen Doyle together and read out the numbers on the bridal invoice. She asked me to scan it that afternoon. While the kettle hissed for a second round of tea, my father told us what the paper hadn't. How the organist stopped, how the whispers rose like wind in rafters, how Mark Rivers held up bank slips for £6,000, how Nora James counted out the dates her $14,500 had left her account. He said that when he finally stood, the church felt like a stage after the players had slipped away. "I should have known," he whispered. I looked at him for a long moment. "You should have listened," I said, and there was no anger left in it, only the clean sound of a thing set back on the right shelf. After they left, I took a slow inventory of the afternoon light. My one good mop, $1.18 at the hardware store. The bucket discounted $10 by a kind clerk with kind eyes. The vacuum that coughs when it eats a paperclip. I wrote a list for Monday. Raise deep clean rate by $2, print 20 more cards, $6 at the corner shop. Buy bleach, $3, and gloves for $1. I added a line at the bottom for a small dream. £20 set aside each month toward a future ticket to London, not as an escape, but as a promise that maps can be real if you walk them with your own feet. Near dusk, Officer Doyle called back. A credible tip from Miami, a one-way ticket bought in cash for $1,100, 3 IDs in the name of a woman who is not Vivian and also was. "We may need you to testify," she said. "I will," I said. "I want the record clean." That night the neighborhood settled into its lamps and murmurs. I scanned the invoice, attached it to an email, and folded the original into an envelope with my rent receipts and spare keys. Then I stood at the mirror and tucked one of my cards into the frame, so I could see it every morning. My name, my work, proof that I am not what anyone called me, but what I keep choosing. On the wedding day, my phone would not stop ringing, because the life I'd built was louder than the lie I'd been told. Tomorrow I will scrub and sweep and sign my testimony. Tomorrow I will answer new clients, one in Detroit, one in New York, both asking for a good, honest clean and offering $120 for the first visit. And when I lock my door, one door, stubborn in summer, faithful in fall, I will say my name out loud, because I am the storyteller, and I am still here, in America, standing on floors that shine.